A new poll shows Senator Elizabeth Warren leading in California, and presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg is getting some flack for a tweet about neoliberalism.
Team Rising is here to drop some knowledge. Roger Fisk is a Democratic strategist, Obama administration alum, and Jack Kingston is former Georgia congressman and the Trump campaign senior advisor. Welcome to you both.
Great to see you guys.
Thank you.
Very interesting new polling coming out of the state of California. Elizabeth Warren has got an 8-point lead over there. Bernie Sanders coming in at 21%, and Kamala Harris coming in fourth at 11. Roger, this is a
slip into third here.
I mean, I think the last time you were on, we talked about Andrew Yang, who was beating her in the state of California in that Emerson poll. I mean, that may not be the case here, but being fourth in your own home state is basically fatal politically in this primary process. Do you think she'll even make it as far as California at this time?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question. I don't necessarily see her getting a ticket out of Iowa. You can kind of spin that, you know, you get maybe one bite at that apple. I don't necessarily see her in the top 3 in New Hampshire, and then for whatever reason, I don't see a lot of momentum or traction for her in South Carolina. So she should, you know, she's out there saying, I'm going to basically move to Iowa, which is the smart thing. Her and her team and her camp shouldn't be talking at all about Super Tuesday because they have a long road to go between now and then. And those would be great problems to have, but they can't worry about that stuff right now.
Yeah, Jack, what do you think?
Well, I think it's interesting not only for Kamala Harris, but the fact that Joe Biden has slipped so much, and the socialist liberal faction in terms of Warren and Sanders has grown. In June, if you look, the two of them together had 18 and 17%. It's 35% of the vote. Now you can see that they are both really gaining. If you add the two together, they're somewhat picking apples out of the same tree, but clearly peeling off votes from the rest of the candidates.
I said this yesterday. What I really owe a lot of because there are two consistent narratives, right? Like Biden is slightly going down, Bernie is generally maintaining, Warren is going up, Kamala is also going down. I think Warren very much benefits from Kamala's demise because Kamala really had a lot of her support amongst upper middle class white liberals. That's the exact same base that Elizabeth Warren seems to be very popular on. What is interesting, though, and this is what we continue seeing in the second choice polling, is that ideology is not what marries a lot of this stuff. The second choice for Biden voters is Bernie. The second choice for Bernie voters is Biden. Why do you think that is, Roger? People say name ID, but I don't buy it.
Because we make decisions with the limbic part of our brain, which is not necessarily logical, right? It's a visceral gut response, traditionally just called the gut, in politics. And then a lot of what we think are decisions are really rearranging the furniture of our mind to accommodate a destination that we've essentially already arrived at. And you see this play out in a whole bunch of different ways. I won't go into the commercial applications of it, but they're very interesting. What people, at least on my side of the aisle, respond to ultimately is authenticity, which is this person who they say they are?
Right.
And then what they're looking at is through the full arc of this experience, because one of the things that you're also seeing play out in these numbers is if you didn't have a significant presence in the early states 1 year out, you're really not competing. And we've talked about this before, but if you parachute in July and you go to a state fair and you have 3 or 4 offices, it's not a serious effort. You've got to be in there deep, even 15 months before all this stuff, really. So that's what I think is kind of playing out, and what you need to see, what the campaigns need to do, and I think we were successful in both Obama campaigns, is that every single consumer kind of touch point validates and even enhances that gut sense of who that individual is. And many campaigns end up going in kind of the direction of what I call scattered good intentions, which is they lunge at the news cycle or they embrace some new online tool without really making sure that they have a cohesive, clear and simple identity, because once you establish that, everything that flows from it is logical, and it validates the decision people have already made.
And part of that having a coherent brand, right? I'm trying to make a segue here to Pete Buttigieg.
I was going to say, part of that about
somebody
saying
who's maybe struggled with that is Mayor Pete, whose essential theory of the case here and the argument he's been making is basically, I'm young. He represents a lot of the same types of politics of the past, but he's younger than Joe Biden. So that's been his thing. It's like, well, if you like this kind of neoliberal approach of Obama, of Biden, I'm your guy, but I'm not 70-something years old. Right. So a tweet that he sent out yesterday caught the eye of many, including my dear co-host here. He was asked, how do you define neoliberalism and what do you think is wrong or right with it? He said, I'd say neoliberalism is the political economic consensus that has governed the last 40 years of policy in the US and UK. Its failure helped to produce the Trump moment. Now we have to replace it with something better. And Jack, the punchline here is that Pete is like the emblem of neoliberalism. He's right about all of that, but he is neoliberalism.
And I said, who wants to tell him? I mean, it's like, it's fascinating in a way that somebody could acknowledge this and also continue to be the very face of it. And I think that's what's the funniest part, Jack, is that like Trump was the ultimate break from this neoliberal consensus. Pete Buttigieg in many ways is like, we need to get back into Paris, we need to do all these other, we're the laughing stock of the world. I mean, these are things that do not fundamentally animate the campaigns of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren.
Well, and attacking Medicare for all and these sorts of things. It's
I have an economics degree from the University of Georgia. I don't know what the hell he's talking about. I don't know what he was trying to say. If you listen to him talk about the Bible, for example, he kind of airdrops and sews things together that aren't really together, and then he talks a bunch of gobbledygook that sounds like a graduate student coming home to proudly pound his chest.
Yeah, this is very much the I went to Oxford and I definitely know what neoliberalism is.
And actually in the School of Economics there's a lot of different definitions for neoliberalism, and some of them he would be against. But the other part to me is that, okay, Mayor Pete, you don't like Biden and Warren and Sanders because they're too old, but really they've been tested and they've been throwing out ideas, to get back to Roger's point, on authenticity. There is more on authenticity with them. But what is your solution when you say you're going to replace neoliberalism with what? Give us your 10-point plan. We're all ears.
With a younger guy who's also neoliberal.
And that's really what it is, Roger. I don't... Like you said,
I had to look it up. Is incredible.
In terms of authenticity, this is probably the most inauthentic thing that he could do. I mean, there are actually people online who are proud to call themselves neoliberal, who love Pete Buttigieg, and honestly, he should lean into it rather than try and say, oh, it's a failed consensus and I'm going to replace it with even more failed consensus. I thought it was just a very odd thing for him to do.
One of the trends in the middle and lower tier of the Democratic candidates has been this eagerness to take things back so quickly. And I don't know why people just can't say, this is who I am and this is what I stand for, and if you don't like it, you can go screw yourself. Like, it's relatively easy instead of just falling all over oneself. Like, I don't know what neoliberalism means. In a real way. I mean,
Pete defines it pretty well here. It's just the problem is that
he's actually right.
Failed.
The interesting thing about this, because I love looking at this in the broader context of history, is there's credible arguments to be made that our last domestic liberal was actually Richard Nixon. When you think of it in a lot of ways. So when you start to really kind of lay out the context of who or why someone would be saying something like this, I don't necessarily get it. I will say tactically, in terms of candidate discipline and stuff, like, this is what happens when you open up your bus tour to press and they're just sitting around gobbling up everything you say, because then you start to, and your people start to think that everything is some kind of epiphany or revelation, and so it's automatically then exported out into any of these numbers of ways that people can do it, and you end up with this stuff, which is like, I don't know, I would have focused more on someone's kind of kitchen table issues than whatever this is.
There's no practical application here that we can come up with.
All right, stick with us, guys. We got more we want to talk to with Team Rising after a quick break.